Hello there, and welcome to day 27 of Weekends Web App, the stream where we're building a complete web app live on stream, done right and done live, a whole lot. And if you want to follow along at home, you can pull the repo down from github.com/weareoffslider/weekendswebapp. Once you've pulled it down, if you want to start the code at today's day of code, then you want to use git checkout day 26, and that'll bring us to the end of the code that we finished off yesterday. All right. So what are we doing today? Yesterday we were sort of putting some finishing touches on some basic CSS code, introducing to CSS, and just like how we're going to name things using the BEM convention. Now that we know how we're going to do CSS for the components, we sort of need to now work into like building the actual UI components for the application that we're about to develop. To do that properly, we need a component server, a component layer of some description. And for those of you who are familiar with the kind of tools in this space, you might have heard of something called Storybook. We're not going to use this. There's some issues with it that I don't super like the fact that it doesn't do what's the best way to say this? It doesn't do isomorphic rendering, so it doesn't do server-side rendering particularly well, and it doesn't necessarily give you a lot of, it's an extremely complicated piece of software, or at least it's grown to become one, and we don't actually want all that complexity. But essentially what it, the real important thing that allows you to do is sort of have particular components and then have examples of that component. So let's say, this is an example from Coursera's website. If we were to go to this read more section, then you can see all these different elements that are they're built out and show you how the read more component works. And this can be very useful because what it gives you is the ability to sort of see all the different ways in which this shows up. I mean, we could say take a look at a star rating and see all these different styles. Yeah, like some with half stars, some with more stars, or some without any interactivity, basic usage, that kind of thing, or even completely different sort of stars, as it were. So a component library of some description is quite essential in today's sort of modern front-end development. You want to be able to build these components in isolation and then just sort of stack them together once you're done. And by building them in isolation, it sort of forces you to keep in mind those limitations and not build things too coupled. So if we're not going to use Storybook, what are we going to use? Well, realistically, my favorite way to do this is to use a little sort of homegrown component server that we've made. And we've got published on NPM. It doesn't have a super large amount of documentation, but it's quite lightweight, and that's kind of why I like it. And it also is not too opinionated, so it gives us an ability to choose whatever sort of components, whether it's server-side rendered or client rendered only, or like a whole bunch of different things that we can sort of just do to set it up. So it's gonna be quite nice. We're gonna work towards using this library first, just with some basic components that just output HTML, and then eventually we will get to the point where we use React, which is what we intend to use for the rest of the application. All right. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into it. So on NPM, it is Universal Component Server is the name of it. This one right here, a pretty chill component server that doesn't discriminate on the type of components you write. So it supports isomorphic code testing with both client and server rendering. And as I said, maybe in the future we'll get some proper documentation down for this, but for the moment, this video is going to serve as sort of that documentation. Anyway, let's bring that in. So we'll go yarn add development tool universal component server. Okie dokie. Now I'm going to put my tools over here, and I'm going to put my code over here, because we're going to have to go going back and forth on this just for a little while. Now we need to put this component somewhere first. What I'm going to do is in the client, we're going to have a component server, because it's sort of directly related to that. And then in client component server, we're going to start off with a config file. And I'm going to use some notes for this off in the other window, just so I can keep track of what the heck I'm doing and make sure I don't make any mistakes. Right, let's first pull in our concept of universal components config. And that's going to come from universal component server. So we're going to create an instance of this, and there's some important things to keep in mind with this. We are going to lean very heavily on Webpack to sort of handle fetching all of these different components and making use of them. So what we do is we create a Webpack context, and I'll just take a moment to explain that after I put this line here. So Webpack's pretty cool, right? There are a few things that are very useful about it. And one of the most useful is the way it handles sort of dynamic imports. What it allows you to do, so here you can do certain things where, say, you put in a particular variable, and what it will do with that variable is it will go and look through your files and find ones that could possibly match that, right? So it passes, you can see here, it passes the require call and extracts that information to go and grab some information, see all the things that it relates to. But you can also do this more explicitly. You can create a context yourself. So here we've got this react.require.context. Then you declare a particular folder, and then after that you can give it true or false here. Now if it's true, that means it will essentially walk into subdirectories to go find everything. And this last regex is optional. You don't have to put that in there, and if you choose not to, then it will just grab every file it can, which is really what we want for the component server. Now, if we were to jump over here on the other side and look in client, so we've already got this UI folder, and we're not doing a whole lot with it. We're creating these views things, and then we've got home.ts. We could try and make use of it, but I don't really want to. So I'm going to make a test component here. And we're going to make a folder called atoms, which is, the significance of that will come up later, but atoms are essentially small things that can do be the code that we need them to be, okay? So, and inside atoms, we're going to create a button folder. And in that button folder is where we're going to create our first component, as it were. So I'm just going to take a moment to build that out. So where is that? Client, UI, atoms, button, and then we'll put it inside a button.html.ts. And that .html is just to say, hey, this is definitely a component, and what we're going to do with that component, we'll get to in a moment. So I'm just going to create that file for now. Actually, no. Let's do this component, as it were. Now, eventually we're going to write things with React, but I don't want to introduce React yet. So instead, all it's going to be is a function that accepts some sort of data, and we'll just give it the any type for now, and returns the DOM that's going to go in it, right? So in this case, we're just going to go, we'll make it a button. We'll give it a class that equals button. And then let's give it some text, so data.title. And we'll just close off the button after that. Okay, so this is sort of like, this is just like real simple concept of a component where we only have one sort of property or data that comes in, and that makes the button change its title, right? Really straightforward little component that we're going to do here. Okay, so that's our concept of a component, and what we're going to do here is we're going to create this this context, and then we're going to create a config for our server. So we're going to use UCS config as our variable, and we're going to create a new universal component config using this context. It's really critical, right? Oopsie daisy. Okay. Now, in order for the component server to work, it needs to know where to get things from. And in this case, we want to have some sort of HTML components or something like that. So we're going to add to the UCS config, we're going to add a component runner. And in this case, the name of them is going to be HTML components. or we'll call them HTML functions, because that's what they are. They return HTML, right? And that's not quite enough to get the job done. We need a matcher as well. So that matcher is going to be how it figures out, okay, what code is part of this. And in this case, it's going to be star star star, which means to follow all the directories. And then it's going to find files that end with html.ts. Okay, so we've got ourselves a matcher, but we're still missing some stuff. We need a function for getting the test data. So the test data helps inform what it is exactly that's available to test this file with. So let's create some test data for this button.html. So we'll go a button.data.ts. And let's give it a try. Okay? So let's create an export of default and give it a title of button text. And let's do another one. Let's do export const test. We'll just give it test2, and then we'll give it a title of something else, something like the second button text. Super original, I know. Let's go. All right. So now that we've done these, we'll just throw that on the end of there. Okay, now that we've done these, we can create a little function that tries to get these things. And what we can do is this context, it allows us to get the keys from this context, right? So we can go const keys to get all of the different things that are in this context, all the different file names, right? And our hope would be that we should be able to get all of this information. We should be able to like figure out where these files are. So what we can do is we can, in fact, we don't even need to do that. We can use a test path, and it's simply going to be path.replace .html.ts with .data.ts. So the only data that really matters to us is going to be ones that sit side by side the button file, or like any .html file with .data next to it. That's how that's going to work, right? So we've got that test path, and if we can find that, so if we keys index of data path does not equal -1, so that's another way of saying is data path inside the keys array. So if keys index of is in there, then we know that we can return like we can go and get that file. And the way we do that is we treat context like a function. So if we do context test path, sorry, I made a mistake there. That should be test path. What did I do here? One too many. There we go. All right. So if it returns context test path, then that's all good. But what if it doesn't find it? Then that means we just need to return some default data, and that's what we'll do. We'll return default. Now, I don't like that too much, probably because I haven't done everything else that I need to. So let's keep on going. So render server is where we tell it what exactly this component is meant to do when it renders on the server side, which this server will always be willed to do. And I mean, we could potentially do nothing here and just return an empty string, and that would be fine. But in this case, we can actually return the right information. So we'll do just that. So we've got the component module. And .default on that will be that function, that default function that gets returned, this one here, right? So what we want to do is we just simply want to return component module.default with data, a call of data like that. Now the alternative is render client. And we're not actually going to do anything with render client just to start off with. We're not going to go that far, but we still need to put it in the definition here. So we'll just return null on that one. All right, now we are good. Okay, so we've made the type system happy, and this believes that we're doing good things for it. Okay, so that's the central config of of this, we need to export the config, and now we need to make our concept of a server. Right, so we're going to go to client component server server.ts, or create it rather. And I'm going to move my notes over as well. Okay, so in this case, what we want to do is we want to import the universal component server. And the reason for this decoupling is so that we can create a client and also a server without having them both be the same thing, because the client is going to be a little bit different to the server in terms of what it needs to do. Anyway, we're gonna bring in fact, we need to add something new here. We also need Express, which is a node server. There's an unfortunate reality here, which is that I need to go a little bit quicker with this, because I mean, the details of how the code gets here is slightly less important, and I'd possibly be overcomplicating things if I was to go too much into this. What I really want to do is get us writing components so we can see the benefit of how these things look. We want to take a little helicopter ride to the peak so that we can know what it looks like from what the view looks like up there, because this is where our development is going to be ideal. All right, now once we've done this, we've got the UCS config. What we need to do is also have ourselves a UCS server, and then add create a new universal component server. We start by feeding it the config, and then after that we feed it some options, which we're going to do blank for now. I don't think we even needed Express. Oh, no, we do need Express. We need it for some things. I need to bring in the types for Express though, which I'll do. Very good. Okay. Next up, now that we've done this, we need to run this server. So we're going to just have here at the bottom UCS server dot run server. There is an extra step that we're going to do before we finish that off, but for now this will suffice. All right. Now what's next? Well, we need to make sure that we need to actually compile these files, because at the moment our scripts file doesn't go anywhere near it. We've got a test one and we've got an app one, but we do not have one for this this component server, as it were. So let me clear this out. Just take a look at my notes again, and this time we're going to use Webpack to create something that technically runs as a server. Packaging with Node is, I mean, it feels kind of weird at first, but it's actually quite a helpful way of handling this and creating a sort of a nice tight bundle that deals with all the things that you need it to deal with. Now, let's jump in here and take a look at what we've got. So we've got this app.ts, this test runner.ts. We're going to move on to a component server of some description. So let's pull this out. We'll just start it duplicating this, and then we'll take this client source, and then we know that we've got a component server folder in it, and then server.ts. So that's the start of our thing. Now, we cannot create this into a build web assets folder. So let's revisit our config and look at that. So we've got build web assets. Okay, we need something different. We need a build component server, and we'll create a folder just for that one. This will all become a little clearer real soon. All right, build component server. That's good. What do we need here? Yes, we need to make use of it down here. So here we've got path build web assets. Instead, we're going to go path, what am I doing? Build component server. That's it. So that's the path it's going to go into. We need to give this file a name, and we're going to go a bit further here and go WA components. We're still not ready to reveal the name of this app, so let's just do that. And I'll just do .server.js, because there's going to be a client version of this soon. We'll remove the bundle analyzer for now. I don't really want to do that. And now we need to change the target of this this thing here. So let's take a look at that. We got target, and we changed that to node. Now let's take a moment to look at Webpack on this particular issue. So if we look at config and we see the target section, we've got all these different types of target, and the default one is web, and that's the standard. And then you've got different settings. So you've got web worker, which is another type of script that we can run in our website, but has less available to it. And like compiling it as a web worker just gives it that slightly different approach to things. And then we start to look at Node, WebKit, Node, and then Electron, which for those who are not aware, I may as well just mention it just because it's mentioned there, but Electron is a way that you can package your web apps into cross-platform desktop apps. Something that we might do down the track, but nothing that's a priority right now. Anyway, back to target. So we're going to set that to node in this case here. Now, there's a few little quirks that we just sort of need to deal with. I want to have access to dirname, so I'm going to put that in there. Some of this is going to look like incantations just to try and make things work, and that's because they are incantations that try to make things work, okay? So, deal. Let's see, what else do we need? I don't believe we actually need anything else to make that config work. So, let's just verify that, and if we run gulp, let's see if it tanks or not. All right, well, that looks promising. What I'm going to do is going to push gulp off to another screen now and create a new one. And let's just have a slight dive around and see if we can find the build. All right, so we can see here we've got these wwa components.server.js. It's massive. Well, I mean, massive when you think of JavaScript runtimes, which usually you try to keep a bit smaller than 1.4 megabytes. But and it doesn't do an awful lot, but it looks like it works. And what we're going to do now is we're going to set up our component server in some way that we can easily run up said component server as we're developing. And usually what we do to do that is we chuck in a line to the component JSON. So you can see how we've got this yarn build or yarn dev, which we haven't really been using a whole lot. We probably should. What we're going to do now is we're going to add a yarn component server command. And what this is going to do is, and in fact I've got to add another little tool to make this work called NodeMon. NodeMon is, all it does is it runs Node, except it's listening to certain files, and if those files change, then it will update. It will automatically reload the process. So that's kind of nice when you're running a server, right? So let's do that. We're gonna we have to throw that delay in there, otherwise sometimes NodeMon does weird things. And we're gonna make it watch build / component server. And then we're gonna make it run build / component server / what is the file's name? What am I looking at? We're looking at build / component server. We're looking at wwa components.server.js. Oopsie daisy. Yeah. It's because NodeMon got added to it. So I need to, I'll just run this again. Close that. Open it again. Does it have NodeMon in it now? Yes, it does. Right there. Very good. Okay. So, now that we've done that, and we've still got gulp running in the background, so hopefully this should work. Let's try and run yarn component server and just see what's up. Might work, might not. That looks promising. Okay, and it's started a server and it's listening on port 3000. So let's check that out, eh? What did you do that for? Okay, so we have ourselves a component library. And if we click on button, we can see the second button text and the button text. So that was the default one. The order's a bit skew-iffy. I don't really care about it too much, but it is what it is. We've also got a way to... So this is the component server, right? So it lists out all the different components, and at the moment we only have one of them. because it hasn't found any others. But this allows us to sort of play with the component server and play with the components that we build and make use of them and render them out. And at the moment, there's no client-side code that's running. Like it just immediately returns out. But we could add some client-side code eventually, although it's going to be beside the point. Now, at the moment, there's none of our CSS being applied to this, so we really want to fix that up. So if we have app.less, we do have some place for CSS to go, and it does get outputted into build web assets. But what we want to do is also output it into build component server, because otherwise it's not going to have the CSS available to it. We also need that little component server. Let me grab it out. We also want that little component server to actually serve those CSS files. So what we're going to do is, again, I'll jump back to my notes so I'm not wasting people's time. We want to make it so that we like those files are available, and the simple way we can do this is we can run UCS server .config app. That allows us to sort of directly interface with the Express app that sort of works under the hood. And then we're going to throw in some middleware, and it's going to be called express.static __ dir name. And that's actually going to serve the file for us. And we can test that if we go here and actually I better check the name of the file first, because it's very easy for me to forget these things. Oh no, it hasn't. That's right, I've got to restart Gulp first. Okay, so you can see there we've got app.css in there. And if we go to localhost.3000, it's blank. Right, let's fix that too. So let's give the body a slight background color. There we go. All right, so now, yeah, you can see here we've got our CSS. All right, we need to actually get that onto this page here though, because at the moment there's nothing in the head, no styles, other than the default styles for the component server. And the way the basic configuration works here is that if we want to add style sheets, we just tell them where it is, well, what the path is, and it goes from there. So this one is right at the root, and it's called app.css, and that will be sufficient for now. So you can see now that we have a link rel style sheet, and you can see how the background color has shifted for it. Okay. Now this app.less, like this, like we obviously don't want to have the CSS for button in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab client UI /atoms/button/button. Yeah, instead of that, we're going to go button.less. And what we'll do is we'll just do some basic styling for the button, right? So we'll give it some padding of 20 pixels. That'll do. We will change the background color. Background color to be blue. We will change the border to be blue. One pixel solid blue. How about we give it a nice rounded look? We'll give it 30 pixels rounding. And then we will make the color of the text white. Real simple stuff. We've got to import it though in order for it to work from this file. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to grab UI /atoms/button button/button.less. Now this won't be how we always do things. Eventually what we'll do is we'll set everything up as a dependency chain. So we will only sort of depend on like particular views, sort of top level views, and then they will in turn require what they depend on, and they will in turn require what they depend on, and eventually they will end up at the button. Yeah, where am I? Okay, cool. All right, so hopefully, if that worked, yes, okay, we've got ourselves a button. Okay, you can tap on it, done, do nothing, but that's enough for us. You'll notice things like the mouse doesn't actually change pointer when it's on there. So what we can do instead is we can give it a cursor pointer. Technically, that'll automatically happen if it's in a context where it would become useful. But for now, oh, hang on. Am I being turned into a liar? Why is it not behaving for me? Did it not like that? Maybe it's not picking up on my less changes when I do that. Yeah, it didn't pick up on it, and I'm not entirely sure why. No matter, we'll figure that one out. Let me just take a real quick moment to check the watcher. As an aside, while I was when I was working on this tooling, there was a point where I decided to write my own task runner, which sort of worked the way I wanted it to. So we might at some point end up porting over to it as sort of a bonus episode. It might be safer to do it sooner rather than later. I do much prefer how my little Snowflake task runner works compared to this because it's plug-in free. But we'll see how we go. All right, so at any rate, we have ourselves a place where buttons work, and we can see how they line up next to each other, and we can also click on singular ones and we'll get just that particular button, so we can get more than one case of data if we want to, and it's quite easy to see the additional page versions of that data. So we're looking pretty happy. We've got ourselves a basic concept of a component. And this will serve as a foundation for how everything sort of comes together in the near future. While we're here though, we may as well, because we've gotten that set up in pretty decent time, we can also set up the client side of the TypeScript. Client side of the component server rather. So just going to refer to my notes here on this one. Okay, the notes are barely anything for the universal component config client because it does pretty much everything for you. So here we just need to do universal component server, import UCS config from /config.ts. Oh no, we don't need .ts, and we'll go const UCS client equals new universal component client. And that is it for the client itself. Now we just need to give it some code, so or rather build the code for it. So again, this one's definitely one that's quicker if I refer to the notes, so I'm going to do just that. In this case, we're not going to have a target of node. It's going to be different. We're going to grab the client. We're going to have the file name of client here. And then we're going to change a few things. So we're going to make sure that there's no target of node. What else am I looking at here? Yeah, there's some other slight things that we need to do. We want to make sure that we don't actually pull down. There's certain things just because we're depending on the universal component server. It can have this habit at the moment where it pulls down Express and runs it on the client. Express being a major web server doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to do that, so we're going to do just that. We also want to make sure that there's certain things that just don't happen based on Node, so we need to make sure that it doesn't try to bring in file system stuff or net stuff or anything like that. Again, it's not a big deal if none of this makes too much sense to you. It's just the things that we need to do to make our tooling work sometimes, and there's no shame in not really keeping up with that because it's a super common thing to have problems with. All right, so once we've done that, we'll need to kick on with what's it called, we'll need to kick on with Gulp again. Now you can see that we've got our WWA components.client.js, which is good. And now let's take a look at what we can do with it. So yeah, now that we've done that, we need to just go back to the server one more time, and instead of style sheets, we need to refer to a script. In this case, the script is called WWA components.client.js. Oopsie daisy. Not typing so good tonight. Bit tired. All right. So now if we do that, we should hopefully, yep, you can see it's pulled that file down and did something with it, but nothing actually happens in here. So let's start to change that. So we'll start off by jumping into the config and just getting it to console log the container, component module, the data, and the path. Just for fun. Okay, so you can see all of that data come in, and it essentially runs that render client for every single one of these containers with its relevant data in place. And what's useful about this is sort of we have the flexibility to tell this component server to do whatever we need it to do. And if we've got absolutely no reason to run code on the client, on the web app itself, then that's fine. But what if we do? Let's spend the last little bit of our time diving into that. So if we were to make a more traditional website or something like that, typically what we would do, and by we I mean obviously my working practice, because I can't speak for the whole industry. Typically what we would do is we would create a client file to live with it, right? And that client file would be like the things that happen when this app gets run. No, hang on, I haven't named it. I gotta either give it a name or just make it the default, which is what I'm gonna do. So it would potentially be some code that runs whenever things happen, right? So in this case, what we're gonna do is just do a console log hello, and then maybe we just put in some play code here just to sort of make the point, right? So we've got this console.log hello, and then here, well, we've got this component module. And what we actually want to do is we want to get this client file and make use of that rather than making use of this module yet again, right? So let's think about that. Well, up here, we've already got this way of getting the data file, right? Well, it turns out we can do exactly the same thing. We can go const client path. We'll get the keys as well, always useful. Whoops, let's return null here. And what we're going to do here is if keys.index of client path. So if the client path exists on our list, because there's going to be some files that maybe don't need client files, right? Now that's fine, we just avoid them. But if they do, then let's call context.testPath, or client path, sorry. And then we will call it. And in fact, we will call it with a scope. So it's always within that HTML element, right? So yeah, we would call the default function on it, and we would call it with container. Or would we? No, we wouldn't. We would get child nodes. And we'll get the first child node because we know that that's the one that we actually want, right? And hopefully, if I haven't made a terrible mistake, this should actually work and give us everything we need. Well, not quite then. Because we're pulling in data. We want that to be client.ts. That's better, isn't it? Here we go. So now we can see that we've got that particular node, which is what the scope is, and then the hello. Okay. So let's think of something real basic that we can do with it. Hey, what if we fed it its data as well? Okay, because it's not like this code is going to go the distance. We will excise this code in the near future. So what if we were to say we will to uppercase all of this stuff and just run it onto the scope, right? So we've got scope and we've got the inner text content. And what we're going to do is take data.title.to uppercase, which is a function which makes the string uppercase. I'm just going to see if that works. Very good. Okay, so you've got some basic code that we can sort of test how things work. So we know it renders. If we delete that, we know it renders this way. So the server-side render is good. And then we've got this side, we've got, okay, some client code that runs and works upon it. And this will grow in complexity as we get further along, because now we'll start to like actually build real components and be able to test them in this nice little isolated way. We've got lots of different things that we could do with it. For instance, let's talk about, if we're thinking about buttons, right? We've got this idea of, so we've got button.html.ts. Say we've also got a modifier, right? So say we button, I'm just going to keep this simple for now, modifier, data.modifier. That'll do. So now, let's say we, what am I doing here? Let me chuck this off because we don't need it in the way anymore. So let's now jump into button.data.ts and make use of that modifier. So we'll go for red and we'll go for a modifier of green here. Okay, so now we could do something like we could do the red here, and we'll just change the background color to be red and the border color to also be red. And we've got a green version, so let's do the same. So we'll do red and turn it into green. Now we've got a couple of modifiers. We've got more exercising of the code happening. So we're starting to like have a bit more flexibility with what we do. That's all. All right. Well, this one, I don't think there's too much more to say on this. I feel like at this point we will then take this component server to explore React as a concept. And I want to have like I want to be fresh, and I want to have a full day, full hour to work on it properly. So this is not a good time to start on it. So what I'm going to do is cut this one short. We'll commit our code and then go from there. Okie dokie. So that's going to call it for here. We'll what do we got here? So this is day, I'm just forgetting, day 27. So set up basic component server for HTML components. Cool. All right, so you can start to see where we're going with our concept of components. We're making a small bundle where we've got all the test data we need, the actual running code, the running client code, and the styles for it. And that's going to build out to our proper React components, our proper UI elements that we're actually going to be working with. So I'll chuck day 27 there and push that up as well. And that'll pretty much do it for me. So You can find that all on github.com/weareoffslider/weekends web app, and you can see that commit that's just gone up. So feel free to use that as a jumping off point next time we start the stream. We'll be picking up next week on Tuesday, where we'll be diving into React, the concepts that like the actual sort of rendering process that allows us to do, and how it allows us to build proper UI components that we can sort of use for the long term. They'll make the long haul be efficient and all that good stuff. But that's pretty much it from me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.